Hello and welcome to my channel. The title of this video is A Basic Study of the Ashvins in the Vedas. Introduction. Quote, "We invoke you too, Ashvins, when the morning dawns. Nasatyas, grandsons of heaven, wherever you may be, the pious reciters of the hymn invoke you with praises on behalf of the liberal donor of the offering." Unquote. Who are the ASHVIN KUMARs? The ASHVINs are the divine celestial horsemen of whom it is said that they are the best of charioteers. Twins, they figure prominently in the Vedas, especially the Rig Veda, and recede somewhat into the background in the later Hindu legends related in the Puranas. More than simply horsemen, they are also healers and savior figures who protect both religious ritual and the pious themselves in emergencies. The seers of the Vedas considered the divine twins to be worthy of receiving soma, and they asked of them a variety of boons, those common to all the devas, that they should have both temporal and spiritual blessings in the form of not only finding the path to heaven, but for cattle, handsome habitations, and fine sons, in addition to their specific functions. Classes of beings. Vedic literature presents us with four main classes of non-material beings who are called celestial people. Among them are the Ashvins. These classes are hierarchically related based upon their roles and dwellings in the structure of the cosmos, which may also be understood metaphorically as their state of development and responsibility in the management of the world. This is parallel with some passages in the biblical book of Daniel where angelic beings are said to rule over nations. The top of this managerial chain of beings are the devas, of which the Adityas have a special status. These are followed by Rudras and then the Vasus. The ancestors who have attained a higher status are the Pitris. We also find this division in the Yajurveda, where we are told by the sages that ritually the Vasus are associated with the Gayatri meter, the Rudras the Tristup meter, and the Adityas, as head of all of the devas, by the Jagti meter. The Nasatyas or Ashvins are a category of Rudras. This is because they were once human beings who became deified. Interestingly, the Rig Veda tells us this in a matter-of-fact way, but gives no further details or legends associated with their apotheosis. Method of textual analysis. Triplification. The method I will be using to analyze this in the Vedas is called triplification. When one takes a term in the Vedas, such as Saraswati, for example, and studies the mantras consistently, one finds that the term is used generally in three different ways which are determined by context, and also at times poetically related and overlain. Thus, there is the celestial Saraswati, Saraswati Devi, the goddess who presides over learning and arts. There is the terrestrial Saraswati, which was a river in the Vedic era that is now extinct, and the inner or yogic Saraswati, which is Vak or speech. When we apply this structure to the Ashvins in the four Vedas, we discover the divine twins are the celestial horsemen who often function as guides and saviors, while the terrestrial Ashvins are the first light of day, and the yogic Ashvins are related to the energy of respiration and the movement of the breath of life, or prana, called chi in Chinese medicine, within us. This supports our inner sun. This video is a basic study in this subject. I wish to emphasize, as always, that my research is my own and I am not speaking from authority. I have no title, certainly would not want one, and I am not Swami Shaktamatsa. I encourage all, especially those who may disagree with me, to study the Vedas directly yourselves, to verify my claims, or discover for yourselves the Rheingold that is buried therein. I will note as many of the sources and references as I can fit in the notes below to facilitate this for both the curious and the critic. The celestial Ashvins. Appearance. The Ashvins have two distinct forms. This is certainly not uncommon in modern Hinduism or in the Vedas. For example, in the Atharva Veda, Lord Indra is said to have three forms, and in the Rig Veda he is described as blue as well as golden. Because they were humans who became Rudras, the Ashvins have a fully human form. They are described as being youthful and beautiful. In fact, there are several verses which emphasize the fact that they're good looking. The seers call them lords of opulence, so they would have ornate decorations and an aristocratic appearance. They are also radiant and appear to gleam like fire. It is a common attribute of the Devas and etheric species such as the Rudras that they possess this luminous quality, which is much like phosphorescent plasma. In fact, the Adityas are called self-radiant. Interestingly, the European Renaissance magician Dr. Thomas Rudd uses the same description for the entities whom he perceived as angelic, which appeared in answer to his invocations with the almadel. This is a technique from the Key of Solomon. Much like in the Vedas, they are also said to be glorious purple and gold. It would be a mistake to assume, as some do, that the Devas only interact with individuals from the subcontinent. The second form we encounter for the Dasras Indrattamata, or the Ashvin Kumar in the Vedas, are Therianthropes possessed of horses' heads. This form is specifically associated with their functions as guardians of mystic lore, which we will touch on later. The myth behind this relates to a son of one of the founders of Vedic ritual, Dadyuk, the son of Atharvan. This is legendary and not fully taught in the Vedas directly, although the seer is mentioned by name and some details of this legend. In the legend, the sage possessed the knowledge of immortality, the highest bliss, or madhuvidya, the knowledge of honey, and the Ashvins asked the sage to share this with them. He refused on the grounds that Lord Indra would decapitate him. Using their healing ability, the Ashvins gave the sage the head of a horse so they could learn it, as we would say in an English idiom, straight from the horse's mouth. Lord Indra then struck off this head, and the Ashvins returned the sage's original head to him. The severed head became the lunar asterism or nakshatra Ashvini in some accounts. And, as an aside, Ashvini is where I have my Venus in my Kundali. Their therianthropic form is thus related to this legend. However, it should be mentioned, one mantra tells us that they can assume many forms. Personality-wise, the divine twins are said to be truthful, munificent, as well as compassionate towards humans, those in the world below, which is why they often fulfill their role of savior. The chariot. Quote, "Come, Nasatyas, with your sun-clad chariot, in which you have ever conveyed wealth to the donor of the offering to drink the sweet soma juice." Unquote. Perhaps the most unique feature of the divine twins is the chariot they share. In the case of all the other devas in the Rig Veda, these chariots are described as opulent, yet they still appear conventional for the era in which the hymns were written. This is not the case with the Ashvins. Part of the explanation for this may be that the chariot was a thought form made for them by the deified ancestors, the rebus. Most striking is the shape. It's a triangle. There are some variations of description, but the chariot is generally said to be made of gold and ornamented. Pardon me. In one verse, it is said to be composed of 3 metals, but this is not the consensus. All agree the vehicle is highly luminous. It is suryatvaca, clad in the sun, and radiates solar rays. It has 3 poles in the corners which support a canopy, and it is adorned with many banners. Within the chariot are 3 benches, also of gold. It is unclear how these are arranged, if they are set along the sides of the chariot or with the point of the opposite to that of the vehicle. In other words, are they an opposite triangle within a triangle? At times, it is described as being drawn by beautiful falcon-like horses and also by donkeys. The chariot does not move as one might expect, with the point of an angle forward. Rather, it travels with a broadside forward. When it moves, it is quick as thought and is able to cover vast spaces at will, as well as all the 3 regions, the earth, the sky, and the firmament. Not only is it quick as thought, but it is thought that controls the chariot, which is said to be harnessed by the will. As to the size, the seers tell us it is broad as the earth. In one mantra, it is said to be winged and also to glide on the ocean. The chariot conveys the twins as well as Urjani, the daughter of the sun, to whom they are both married. It is also frequently described as a vehicle filled with nectar, honey, or ambrosia. One verse describes it as shedding nectar. This nectar has a different meaning in each expression of the term ASHVIN. Sometimes they carry it in their chariot, something else they carry in their chariot, or rather on their person, is a leather bottle containing soma. I would also point out the Ashvins are never described as armed. The most unique feature of this already unique vehicle is associated with one of the wheels. There are 3, all of gold. In one verse, 2 are described as being invisible. The third is said to be luminous and to rotate in all directions. This is curiously like Ezekiel 1:17, where the prophet describes the wheel of the divine chariot moving in all four directions, save here it is only one at the center, and this is not a movable throne. Activities of the Ashvins. Saviors. Quote, "These, your ancient exploits, Ashvins, our forefathers have celebrated, and we offer adoration to you, showers of benefits, repeating your praises, accompanied by our dependents." Unquote. In most of the legends in which they appear, the Ashvins are presented in their role as saviors. This is one of their defining traits, which is frequently mentioned in the Rig Veda, with 9 hymns giving long list of their deeds. One has the impression, reading the Vedas, that the Nasatyas are the etheric entities closest to mankind. This is perhaps because no deva in the Vedas acts as directly and commonly with man as the divine twins. This cannot be simply because they were once human. The group of terrestrial maruts, who were deified ancestors which oversee the rains, are never portrayed as acting with individuals in the same way as the Ashvins. They remain more remote and amorphous, as if they have blended in with the natural order. Saviors of the pious. Quote, "Let not the wolf, let not the she-wolf harm me in your protection. Abandon me not, deliver me not to another." Unquote. The divine twins show favor to doers of good deeds, and are renowned in the Vedas for their protection of the pious. It should not be surprising, then, that the seers of the Vedas record a number of specific historical incidents in which the aid of the Ashvins was displayed. I will only cite several examples. It seems to have been a custom of the Dasyus, whom the sages at times called asuras, in the way the Germans in the last century during the 2 wars were labeled demons, to hold prisoners in wells. There are several instances where Aryans were so treated and were saved by the Dasras Indratama, the sages Riva and Vandana, as well as Prince Antaka among them. This may also have been a type of torture, as was the case of the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah, and certainly was so in the tale of the famous warrior and Brahmin Kanva, who was held in a heated pit. Called children of the sea, the Ashvins seem to have a special concern for the dangerous passage across the waters. The seer Turga was saved from foes on the sea when the Ashvins launched 4 ships to rescue him. They saved Prince Bhuj from shipwreck, as well as others from floods, to cite 2 examples. Saviors in battle. The celestial Ashvins were actively engaged in the struggles of the Aryan confederacy of the 5 tribes with the Dasyus. They are called leaders of the vanguard of heroes and called upon to destroy the cities of the Dasyus. In legend, they joined with Lord Indra in his fight with the powerful celestial Asura Namuchi. There are also several cases of princes and Brahmins who fought in these conflicts, whom they assisted in battle. For example, they imbued the priest Patharvan with the battle fury like blazing fire, and also helped the prince Sharyata in combat. They further protected Agastya in the fray for kine or in a cattle raid against the Dasyus, and gave Pedu the invincible white horse which is mentioned on several occasions through the Rig Veda. Physicians. Another role of the Ashvins is that of healer. This may not be as dramatic as their famous rescues, but figures prominently in their activity as benefactors to mankind. The sages tell us in several places they are healers and also possessed of healing drugs. We find a number of examples given of their transformative healing and regeneration of devotees, particularly the elderly. Among their most famous healings were the seer Parvaraj from lameness and Rijva, the sage, from blindness. The seer Shovana was a cripple whom they healed, and they increased the lifespan of Prince Somaka, as well as assisting the elderly seer Siavana to have a son despite his impotence. Guardians of sacred lore. The Nasatyas are described as wise, even sagacious, which implies familiarity with oral traditions and rituals. In fact, they are often called leaders of rites. The sages pray to the divine twins to invigorate our understanding for sacred study. The mystic science they possess is described as threefold, meaning it is knowledge of earth, heaven, and the firmament or the realm of the stars. In the Rig Veda, heaven is more than the sky. This refers to the path of the Devas and the path of the ancestors, the Pitris. It is perhaps for this reason that we are told they know all things. Forgive sin. One of these surprising traits we find attributed to the divine twins is forgiveness of sin. They are called sin-removing and are said to wipe away sin. In the Vedic view, sin is not an existential state of being, such as the Christian notion of original sin. Impurity is error, and thus we find the Ashvins in their form as guardians of sacred lore, repairing faults or errors or misunderstandings, and in their function as healers to dissipate afflictions associated with sin. In Vedic ritual. In the Vedic rituals of the Yajurveda, the Ashvins, like in the Atharva Veda, are not as prominent as in the earlier hymns. However, they do receive soma offerings, animal sacrifices, and they play an important role in the construction of the main altar, as well as one particular feature of the soma sacrifice. In the morning soma pressing, with the graha granaha, or offerings of the cups of soma, the Ashvins receive the seventh cup. Another significant and symbolic role the Dasras play in this ritual is called the honey whip. Quote, Ashvins, stir up the sacrifice with your whip that is wet, the foam of your horses and lashing loudly. Unquote. In the soma sacrifices, one of the items which may be potentially mixed with the soma brew from the filter cloth, the brew which has milk as its base, is honey. As the rich honey was stirred into the liquid, the circular appearance is described as a whip, hence the honey whip. In the Sautramani rite, which is a healing ceremony for too frequent indulgence in the Soma brew in its original use, the Dasras are invoked in their form as physicians with an offering of 3 cups of wine. The animal sacrifices specifically offered to the ASHVIN KUMARs are the peacock, and in the horse sacrifice, 2 goats. The only other imagery associated with the peacock in the Vedas themselves relates to Lord Indra. Specifically, his horses are in some hymns said to have hair which has the same coloration and appearance as peacock feathers. There may be a subtle connection here, since the Ashvins are said to give spirit to horses. While not objects of sacrifice themselves, the Ashvins are associated with 2 swans, 2 deer, and wild cattle on fresh pasture, as well as, due to their connection with honey, the bee. Interestingly, there are no mantras associating them with herds of wild or domestic horses, as might be expected given their deep association with horsemanship. By far the greatest role they play is in the construction of the main fire altar. In the area where the earth is plowed in preparation for this construction of the altar, the Brahmins place cut kusa grass in the middle of the site. This grass is dedicated to the Ashvins along with 5 offerings of clarified butter or ghee and the following invocation. Quote, "Dawn with the ruddy-colored cows about her, the Ashvins with their wonderful achievements, the sun together with the dappled coursers, Vaishvanara with Ida and butter, Swaha." Unquote. This same cut grass is dedicated to the divine twins and the Sarvamadva, or the sacrifice for universal success. The first 5 bricks of the second layer of 5 layers in the construction of the main altar, which are laid down, are dedicated to the Ashvins. The reason for this is because they are said to function as the Ardvayu Brahmins in creation of the visible day, as the terrestrial Ashvins are the first rays of light laying down the center of the celestial altar of heaven between the earth and middle air. Among the tasks of the Ardvayu Brahmins was to measure the sacred precincts and light the fire that would be used in the rituals. The terrestrial Ashvins appear to perform this by expanding the limits of the daylight, and that they bring forth the brightness or fire of the sun. This places their set of bricks directly above the center, which was consecrated to the symbolic head of the generative force, or Prajapati, which is beneath the center of the altar in the first layer of consecrated bricks. Counterpoint: the celestial Ashvin Kumar and the ancient alien theory. The legendary literature of Hinduism, the Puranas, is a veritable treasure trove for the ancient alien theorist. They have investigated the Vedas less. Fundamentally, the ancient alien hypothesis consists of 2 parts. 1, archipaphe, which would be the proper word for paleocontact. Physical beings like man, but only technologically more advanced, visited Earth in the remote past. And 2, Hominids were in some form genetically altered by them. I do not accept this view. I have a more traditional view of the Devas and do not think that they were physical beings like ourselves with just better gadgets. To these theorists, the proper identification of the Ashvins is not as etheric entities or forces of nature at all, but as extraterrestrials. One example where we find the Ashvins are viewed through this lens is seen in the classic book entitled The Wars of God and Man by the late Gift of Thoth Zachariah Sitchin. It is an archetypal example of the flaws one often encounters in such claims regarding the Vedic and Puranic sources when read through this theory. To quote directly from the chapter, The Missiles of Zeus and Indra, quote, "The text also speaks of the Ashvins, drivers," is what he says the Sanskrit means, "gods who specialized in piloting aerial chariots. Swift as young falcons, they were the best charioteers to reach heaven, always piloting their craft in pairs accompanied by a navigator. Their vehicles, which sometimes appeared in groups, were bright and radiant, with easy seats and lightly rolling. The rotating wheels, it appeared, served diverse functions, one to raise the craft, another to give it direction, and a third to speed it along." Unquote. Reviewed from the sources given in this study, many of the problems become clear. There are also other points. 1. The word Ashvin in Sanskrit does not mean drivers, as he claimed. That would be either Rathin or Anarvis. Ashvin means possessed of horses. 2. Ashvin is not a name for a profession, as he implies, like we would use the generic noun in English, pilots. There are no groups, but only one set of twins in one chariot. 3. There is no support in the text for the term navigator to be applied to Urjani, the daughter of the sun who accompanies them. 3. The chariot is not driven by the wheels, but by the mounts, either horses or donkeys, which he conveniently left out to give a more mechanical impression of the vehicle. 5. The chariot of the Ashvins is not physical. It is a thought form created by the Rivus. And 6. The Ashvin Kumars were not aliens. They were humans who were transformed after death into a different class of being, Rudras, and are composed of plasma or energy and consciousness, not extraterrestrials piloting nuts and bolts UFOs. The terrestrial Ashvins, renewal and the light of day. Bringers of the dawn. Quote, "The sunrise, your chariot, Ashvins, traversing the regions, is associated with the divine orb on the summit of the eastern mountains." Unquote. The terrestrial Ashvins are called in the Vedas the bringers of day. The symbolic projection of the Rudras into the material world, which reflects their nature and activity, is the first light which rises in the still starry sky to bring the day. This is why they are said to be on the move. These golden lights associated with their chariot are what precede the dawn and which guide the sun. There are a wide variety of mantras associating with the Nasatyas with the dawn. We are told clearly the ASHVINs are united with the dawn. Pardon me. This narrow definition is what distinguishes the terrestrial from the celestial ASHVINs. The obviously etheric Rudras we have previously discussed could not be reduced to merely an effect of light in the sky. The terrestrial ASHVINs are metaphorically related, but not the same. The shedders of rain. The land of the seven rivers, which was the core of the geography of the Vedas, is a semi-arid region. For this reason, rain is, now as it has been, a survival issue. In the Vedas, there are many devas and ancestors who are invoked to bring rain so the bipeds and quadrupeds may not only survive but thrive. It is thus not a contradiction to find this process associated with a wide variety of entities. The sages pray, quote, Ashvins, causing the barley to be sown in the field that has been prepared by the plow, milking the clouds for the sake of Manu, destroying the Dasyos with the thunderbolt, you have bestowed brilliant light upon the Aryan. Unquote. We see here the link with the ritual plowing of the ground to prepare the space for the main fire altar. It reenacts the role of the terrestrial Ashvins. The sages associated the renewal of the light of day with the regenerative power of the rains to sustain life. This is ambrosia. This has a link to the celestial Ashvins in their role as physicians and in the Vedic rituals. The Ashvins are said to be the rulers and the shedders of rain. Their mounts, especially as horses and not donkeys, are also seen to have a metaphorical role in that they are rain-bestowing and rain-drinking steeds. Their chariot follows the tracks of water. May be a simple observation of the rise of the dawn across the sky. One of the epithets of this chariot is that it is, as we've seen, nectar-bearing. In this context, this is the rain. Initially, this may seem a stretch. However, there is an explicit identification between the rain as not only being regenerating, but in one mantra, explicitly honey-colored. Quote, when maruts flying like birds along a certain path of the sky, you collect the moving, passing clouds in the nearest portion of the firmament, then, coming into collision with your cars, they pour forth the rain. Therefore do you shower upon your worshippers honey-colored rain. Unquote. Thus, the nectar or ambrosia brought by the terrestrial Ashvins is the life-sustaining rain. Counterpoint. The terrestrial Ashvins in the Mercury and Venus hypothesis. The view of Dr. Siddharth in his work, The Celestial Key to the Vedas, discovering the origins of the world's oldest civilization from way back in the 20th century in 1999, which I recommend but do not agree with, is that the Ashvins are very different from my own views on the matter. They are, according to him, the planets Mercury and Venus. In his own words, quote, several hymns of the Rig Veda are attributed to the twin Ashvins, but there is some doubt about their identity. A closer look reveals that the Ashvins are the planets Mercury and Venus. Unquote. His view is that the Vedas are a secret code which encrypts information in symbols. He sees this occult subject to be predominantly astronomical. Others, such as Dr. Gupta, who embrace this fundamental premise of the Vedas as a secret code, argue that it is meteorology that the sages were hiding. Dr. Siddharth tells us, quote, the hymns of the Rig Veda are not religious prayers, but astronomical and are scientific facts, or discoveries deliberately camouflaged, unquote. I label this method of reading the Vedas as symbolist reductionist. This assumes that each time a term appears in the Vedas, it has the identical symbolic meaning, which is not readily apparent. This type of reading is problematic because it cannot be consistently applied equally throughout the entire corpus of the Vedas. Dr. Siddharth himself admits this when he writes that, quote, no consistently meaningful explanation of the hymns is available to date, unquote. This applies to his own theory regarding the Nasatyas. Speaking in general, how are we to understand that Mercury and Venus possess healing drugs or that they wipe away sin? If they are only rocks whirling through space, how are they liberal givers? His view is not consistent and is arbitrary. Further, another more general problem with this is that if the seers possess modern astronomical knowledge, then why create a system of sacrifice, which was often costly, when the Devas, who were really distant stars, in his view, will never respond to any prayer? His attempt to demonstrate the age and wisdom of the Vedas undermines all that they stand for in support of a materialistic worldview. This would be a Pyrrhic victory, to say the least. Moving to the particular, Dr. Siddharth bases his theory on several key points. 1. The Dasras are seen at dawn and twilight, and they move on a direct path. They must be, therefore, the evening star. 2. The twilight period is the nectar shed by their chariots, id est their motions. 3. The seers understood their planetary motions and encoded this in the symbolism of the wheels of the Ashvins chariots. The 3 wheels refer to the circular movements that Mercury and Venus exhibit. 4. The Ashvins are described in a sickle shape in forms like the moon. According to the sages, who were aware of the waxing and waning of the planets in the sky. To examine these point by point, 1. There is nothing in the Vedas which identifies the Ashvin Kumars with Mercury and Venus or planets directly. This is unlike, for example, Lord Indra, who is, in one form, identified with Rohita, the red sun in the Atharva Veda. Mercury and Venus are not twins. Due to their orbits, they will always be within 42 degrees of the sun and 0.33 astronomical units apart, but that does not make them twins. The Earth is 0.52 astronomical units from Mars, and we are not twins. Twins means they reflect each other. This is not the case with Mercury and Venus, although Venus is actually more of a twin to the Earth. At the time I am recording this, Mercury is retrograde in Virgo, which might explain why I had some problems, and Venus is in Leo. They do not move together. The evening star is universally recognized as Venus alone, not a conjunction or parallel somehow between Venus and Mercury. Further, I know of no mantra in the Vedas which link twilight periods with nectar. Another point, one wheel of the ASHVIN's chariot moves in all directions. The same cannot be said of the orbits of the planets, as they can only move elliptically or to us in retrograde. They don't go in any other way. They cannot switch from horizontal to vertical and move in all directions. Further, how might he account for Urjani? If she really is the sun with the planets moving around her, it would only be accurate if they really were twin planets moving in the same manner continually. But that is not in fact the case. Further, the chariot of the Ashvins is said to emit vast and infinite radiance, which of course cannot apply to Mercury and Venus. The final point is that the waxing and waning of these planets is not visible from the Earth without a telescope. Dr. Siddharth claims there was a telescope in the Mahabharata, and this is the source of the information. However, even granting that such an instrument did exist in that time, that does not mean it would have existed some thousands of years before. To claim that it must have, because this is the description they gave of Mercury and Venus, which in itself is a disputed point, would be circular logic. Speaking personally, I, of course, do not accept Dr. Siddharth's thesis. He does have more to say on this matter as it relates to the Ashvins and the Nakshatra Ashwini, and I do recommend to the viewer to study this work and to reach your own conclusions. The Yogic Ashvins, stirring the nectar of immortality. The microcosm. Quote, neither is the right hand known to us, Adityas, nor is the left. Neither is that which is in front of us, or what is behind discerned by me. May I, who am immature in knowledge and timid in spirit, obtain, when guided by you, the light which is free from fear. Unquote. Thus far, we have considered the Dasras Indratamata in the exterior world of the macrocosm as etheric entities and natural phenomena. We now turn to their manifestation within the microcosm of man. The first step in this analysis is to outline the most basic relationship we have seen which parallels the other uses of the term Ashvin. We will then develop this to discover the identity and role of the yogic Ashvins. Unfortunately, I'm not technically advanced enough to do graphics to display this, and I apologize for that shortcoming. We find there is a male sun and his daughter Urjani, or the female expression of the sun, his energy or Shakti, and male twins who are in relation to this sun through a connection to her. Their activity leads to the emergence of the dawn, light arising from this sun, and guides the sun into manifestation. The inner sun. The first data point in defining this structure is to discover that the seers did in fact speak of an inner light, so this is not to be understood exclusively as an external phenomena, as some critics might maintain. This is expressed in connection with the legend of the recovery of the stolen cattle held by Vritrasura, which is repeatedly referred to through the Rig Veda. Quote, "Those ancient sages, our ancestors, observant of truth, rejoicing together with the Devas, discovered the hidden light, and reciters of sincere prayers, they generated the dawn." Unquote. If this legend is read in only one manner without triplification, then it becomes hopelessly contradictory and fantastic. In most accounts, it is Lord Indra who liberates the cattle from the Vala cave, not the seers, and the claim that they generated the physical dawn is absurd. There were no sunrises before there were the four Manu. This is the yogic or internal version representing activity of the human energy body. In some versions, in this version, the cows are the herd of the spotted bull. The red bull is the soma, but the spotted bull is different. We find it referred to directly in the Yajurveda when the Brahmins is laying the southern fire in the hall of sacrifice. Regarding this bull, he chants, quote, "As expiration from his breath, his radiance penetrates within. The bull shines out through all the sky." Unquote. The spotted bull is identified as an image of the sun shining in the sky. This yogic inner sun and its role is taught by the sages. Quote, "Then your divine nature, identified with the sun, is the cause of life, and known such solar form of his to be worthy of adoration at the sacrifice, conceal nothing. That motion of him, the all-cleansing sun, makes manifest the universe." Unquote. But there is a deeper dimension and relationship to this auric architecture to be uncovered. The yogic Indra. When they refer to the terrestrial Indra, the seers tell us that the visible form of Indra is the sky. The sky dominates our view, and its permutations through weather, even now, have a powerful effect on our lives in the same way that the celestial Indra is chief of the Devas. The yogic Indra is the empirical or biographical ego which dominates our lives. When examining the verses related to the yogic version of the liberation of the captured cattle, we discover that Indra is in fact present. Quote, "He verily upholds the heaven, he, brilliant leader of the stolen herd, pours forth the flowing water. the mighty Indra manifests himself after his daughter, the dawn. Unquote. One point about this verse is striking, the phrase, the leader of the herd. This should be the bull. Thus, Indra is identified with this bull in this context. Such imagery is found elsewhere in the Rig Veda. Thus, Indra here is identified with the symbolic bull as the representation of the yogic sun. This relationship between Indra and the sun is further supported by hymns in the Atharva Veda. There, the sun is explicitly identified with Indra. The sun is seen as a form of Indra and Vishnu, as well as Prajapati. Prajapati is a mode of the universal creator. In the microcosm, this is the creative and generative agency or force. In the Atharva Veda, he is particularly related to the red sun, Rohita. One detail revealed in these hymns is that the sun becomes Indra, meaning that the biographical ego emerges from the energy of this generative red sun. There is not an absolute identification. There are two layers which are like the intersection of two spheres. The generative energy represented by the red sun and the smaller empirical ego which emerges over it while still overlaying it from above. The source of this microcosmic red sun is necessary to complete the structure. The inner Agni. Throughout the Vedas, the seers refer to the yogic or hidden Agni. What we know of this, highly condensed, is that this is the energetic force which places spirit in the body and is life. The yogic Agni is therefore a form of prana or chi in the human energy body. The sun is also represented as an expression of Agni. In the Yajurveda, when addressing the antelope skin hanging on the Soma cart, the Brahmin chants, quote, "Ascend the eye of Surya, mount the pupil set in Agni's eye, where, radiant with the wise one, the sun, you speed along the dappled steeds." Unquote. The terms Surya and Agni are clearly equated. This is echoed in the Rig Veda, where the sun is called the soul of the world, or the Atma Jagatha, and the eye of Agni. Other devas are mentioned, but that is beyond the scope of this current study. A model. Having studied these components, a theoretical model for this structure may be constructed as follows. It might be conceived that the broader sphere of the yogic Agni forms into the smaller generative red sun from a section of it. The red sun partially overlays this more primordial sphere from which it was generated, and in turn is overlain by the smaller ego which arises from it, as we have seen. One more important piece of information about this is that we are told the location of this nexus in the human energy body. It is the heart. Prajapati, or the generative agency, is the sphere wherein all this activity happens, or the praxis of this development. The order which oversees this process, most broadly, is the same as that which is manifested as the Vedic rituals and maintains order in the cosmos, which is the largest sphere where everything occurs, and that is Vishnu, the yogic Ashvins. Now that this core, as taught by the seers, has been excavated, it is possible to identify and examine the function of the yogic Ashvins within it. Given that this will be parallel to what we have already studied, the following might be elucidated. 1. They lead the sun. 2. As twins, they represent twin aspects of one function. 3. That function is driven by the energy of the feminine pole or Shakti of the sun, Urjani. 4. This generates or dispenses the nectar or ambrosia through the activity of the honey whip. My view is that the yogic Ashvins are the energetic process of physical respiration, the twins of inhalation and exhalation acting in the human energy body. The two aspects of breathing in Sanskrit are called prana and aprana. These are fairly common terms with which people should be familiar. This is how they lead the inner sun that is supported by this process to bring the dawn. We see the connection between respiration and the sun in hymns in the Vedas. In describing the many-colored sun, we are taught one interesting point about him. Quote, his radiance penetrates internally, drawing the air down through the lungs. After having sent it up, the mighty one upholds the sky. Unquote. This expresses not only the process, but the reference to the sky symbolically would be Indra, or the biographical ego which it sustains. A subtle aspect of this is found in the preceding verse, which describes the sunrise. This would be brought by the Ashvins, so they were actually present in these verses in their abstract or inner aspect. The honey whip of ambrosia. Quote, man, manifoldly meditating, severally set its movement on earth, in materiality, verily from fire, Agni, verily from wind, Vayu, or breath, was born the honey whip. Unquote. The outward use of the honey whip in the Soma sacrifice reflects the yogic manifestation. In the ritual, the honey is poured into the mixture of milk and liquid soma, and then is stirred to blend them. Thus, it is an activity. We might even say it's a practice. This effect is created internally by the activity of the yogic Ashvins, respiration, as the Rig Veda tells us, when the diffusive vital breath, prana, excites Agni, he becomes bright. Agni here is the red sun, Rohita, at the core of man. This leads the sun in that it stimulates it to create the inner dawn, which dissolves the lack of clarity or illusion, which is symbolically night, from across the sky or the biographical ego. This is why the Ashvins are called dispellers of darkness. The internal generation of this auric light is reflected in a prayer by the seers to anoint me with the honey of the bee, or in different language, to clothe my form in radiance. Quote, may the splendid car of the Ashvins, which is harnessed by thought, clothe my form in radiance. Unquote. This is how one fulfills the dictum of the Vedic seers to unite yourself to the luminous body. The practice of the honey whip, expressed in the most elementary way, which the sages tell us involves the breath of creatures, is techniques of breath control and meditation. This generates in the energy body the dawn, which is the light that the sages recovered in ages long past when they showed to us the way. Thank you very much.